Hey everybody, welcome to WP Roundtable episode 121. Happy to be here with you today, live from Jackson, Michigan, doing WordPress stuff. Today, I've got a special guest, my good friend, Mr. Jim Luke from Lansing Community College and the Open Learning Web. How you doing tonight, Jim?
Hi, I'm pretty good. How are you doing?
I am doing pretty good. We are on the dawn of voting day tomorrow and on a busy week. So this is an interesting time for all of us, and I'm looking forward to our discussion. There's a lot we've got to talk about.
Yes.
So before we dive in real to who Jim is, for those who don't know, and everything that you're up to, we're going to cover our quick picks of the week real fast. So I've got something that I came across which I think is really worth reviewing. So the plugin team over WordPress.org put together detailed plugin guidelines. So there's always been plugin guidelines for getting plugins on the WordPress.org directory. And although the documentation for those guidelines was always a little scattered and lacking, but they've worked really hard in recent times to put together something that is very comprehensive. And it has an incredible amount of detail regarding the overall expectations for plugins that are going to be hosted on the WordPress.org directory. So they're getting a lot of submissions. There's over 40 some thousand listed plugins on the directory now. And this is a excellent resource for anybody looking to potentially publish a plugin out there. I've published about a dozen or so, and I think it's something awesome to do. Totally recommend it. But reading this post is super cool. And even if you're not posting it, this is a great guideline just for the general practice of making WordPress plugins, because there's a lot of information about developer best practices and working with WordPress properly. So I'll drop a link to this somewhere and recommend plugin developers take a look at it. Jim, do you have anything to share?
Um, well, I'm not sure I can really. I just took a glance at this, but I saw this I think yesterday. Deborah Edwards Honoro shared a link on her blog. Somebody's putting together a website that is actually, and also some Google Sheets behind it for doing in-depth comparison of plugins by different types. And I took a quick look at it, and it looks very impressive and pretty thorough to me. I mean, they have one sheet, Google Sheet, laid out comparing all kinds of e-commerce plugins, and another sheet for custom forms or custom fields plugins, and I really liked it because it looked to me like it's going to really simplify things. Unfortunately, I can't remember the URL of it, but I'll try to look that up and get that to you.
Cool. Yeah, it's always awesome to hear well-respected people in the community sharing their recommendations. A lot of us have done a lot of research, and that information is just great to share. All right. So we've got our quick picks done. Let's learn a little bit more about you, Jim. First and foremost, we want to set the stage here. We want to learn about where you came from and what you've done in the past to get to where you're at today. And there's a lot that we're going to cover. So let's start at the beginning, if you will, and tell us a little bit about before your career really got on track, before you were doing things on the web or in higher ed or really doing anything professionally at all. When you were young, what is it that you set out to do with your life?
Well, what I originally set out when I was a little kid, was I wanted to race cars.
Oh.
I wanted to go to Indianapolis, which never quite got there, but eventually went on to college and went on and had about a 25 year career in corporate planning for a few different firms, a couple paper companies, and then eventually did my own consulting business. And somewhere in there, this is in the 80s and 90s, I got a niche doing consulting for companies. I'm not really that deep a tech background myself. I mean, I don't consider myself a coder, but I always understood the systems architecture side and the big picture, and got a niche helping companies figure out what new technology was going to do their business. And then that led in the late 90s to some ideas we had for some business-to-business e-commerce. We tried to do a startup, ran into some problems. It was tough in that era to get VC money if you were in Michigan. And then the dot-com bubble came along, and And I got tired of traveling, so I decided to go into teaching in academia. And I've spent the last 15 years at Lansing Community College. And in that time, I got focused on online learning, online courses, and was always doing a lot of stuff like that. And then 2008, I found WordPress. And I kind of started to dabble with, I thought, well, it was the recession. I teach economics. I need a blog because the world was coming apart and we economists seemed largely responsible for it. And the stuff going on in the news wasn't in the textbooks. So I started a blog called EconProf, and that's PROPH.com. And I started that on the WordPress.com and fell in love with it. And a year later, decided to do my first self-hosted site. And year after that, I started to go off the reservation at school and started doing, I would say about 80% of the work on my online courses is not done in the school's learning management system. It's done on my own public WordPress sites that I've got on my own multi-site self-hosted network. And I started playing around with that. And then a few years later, I dabbled with, hey, what if I do a course where students have their own blog? And so I'd set one up for them and see what if they do the work on their own blog in public. And that led me into the kind of current area where I'm involved in. And eventually some folks found out at school. I did not get in trouble. And actually have fallen in line with, there's a group of universities and colleges doing similar kinds of things like this, and we're trying to bring university educations and college educations up to date and get people blogs, websites, and get it out of the closed little rooms that it's been in so far. And so last year, or this past year, I got some partial reassigned time. What that means in academic talk is that I had my teaching load reduced by about 25% so that I could spend time on a project starting up websites for students and faculty at the school, and they gave me money to outsource a server.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So I want to step back just briefly to the inception of this idea. So you started your own WordPress blog, and then we skipped over it just a little bit, but I want to understand, like, what inspired this idea for you to say, I'm not getting everything that I need from the provided LMS that we're using at the school. I'm going to try and do something else with WordPress. What was your thought at that time?
Well, my thought at that time was actually about two or three things. One was, textbooks that we were using, of course, weren't very current. There's a long cycle on textbook revisions. And like I say, 2008, that was in the Great Recession. The world was coming apart, at least economically. And, I'm trying to show students a textbook that not only doesn't have it in it, but is trying to imply that maybe it's not possible. And that's kind of problematic, I thought. So I wanted to comment on all the news going on. And I have a thing where I just, I hate doing excess work, and I hate wasting paper. So, I could have copied newspaper articles and printed them off and handed them out to students and stuff like that. And that just seemed like a waste of time. And so at the same time, two other things are happening. One, the LMS, and for folks that are not familiar, when I say LMS, there's a handful of systems. Blackboard is the most famous one that colleges, universities use. These things are very expensive, complex, closed-walled systems. You have to be logged in, you have to be a user, and they are almost, in my opinion, universally difficult to use. They have, I think, generally, and particularly back then, bad user experience. I thought it was very difficult to get good navigation. So at the same time, I was interested in this stuff I'd heard about blogging. So went to the WordPress.com and said, I'll give it a shot. And to be honest with you, here, a little side story. I was so nervous at that time in 2008 that I didn't know how the school would feel about it. I didn't know whether I wanted my name attached to it. So rather than calling it just jimluke.com off the bat, I called it Econ Prof. Later on, students are going, oh, Econ, P-R-O-P-H, I get it, profit. And no, that actually wasn't it at all. It was P-R-O-F was taken. So, it was the closest thing I could come up with, but now now it's kind of stuck. And that's my Twitter handle, everything. So that's how we got started with it. And students liked it. I found it was an incredible resource. I could comment on the news. I could write up my own stuff. And I think the real turning point for me personally came from in March of 2009, General Motors and Fiat and Ford were teetering on the possibility of bankruptcy, but the big question was GM going to go bankrupt? And there was a lot of uncertainty. It looked like the banks were trying to negotiate with GM, and everyone was assuming that everyone was trying to avoid bankruptcy. And without going into the details of the economics of it, I had an insight from my old corporate days, and I went, oh, wait a minute, no. The folks negotiating are actually going to be better off personally, the big banks, if GM does default. And so I wrote up why and the analysis. And as luck would have it, a economist out of Rome, who's pretty reputable and pretty big name, somehow came across my post, reposted it, linked to it, and all of a sudden my hits start jumping through the ceiling as far as I'm concerned. And, I start checking that admin stats page, and it's like a drug at that point. You go, wow, here I am in the middle of, I'm in the middle of Michigan, right there in the Palm in Lansing, and I'm just teaching in a community college. And all of a sudden I'm getting thousands of hits, and literally from around the world. And I'm going, wow, that's a pretty cool thing. So I'm going to keep writing, and, next I'm hooked.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So that really just kicked you into gear a little bit, and inspired you to continue up with the blogging. Did that translate into your feelings towards getting this to be a bigger part of your academics and involving your students anymore?
Yes, that was a key point, because that experience for me, as an academic, I thought it was kind of transformative. And I mean, I would describe it as I found my voice. And I realized this web thing and WordPress enabled me to have a voice. At the same time, what it was also allowing me to do was, in the decades before that, economics was something that really theory development was being done. The big discussions always happened, in private in the lunchroom at University of Chicago or Harvard or something. And now all of a sudden, in economics, now it's happened in some other fields and some other fields not, but in economics at least, the academic discussions all happen on blogs. You've got these professors at top name schools and others, and they're arguing back and forth, and they're doing it on their blogs. So everybody can be part of the discussion, or whether they say anything or not. And I realized along the lines that we could do this with students. And then so fast forward a little bit, a few years ago, I think this was about 3 years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, I can't remember. Anyway, I had a couple of classes where I was teaching. One was called Comparative Economic Systems, and had a student, and I was trying to get the students, was getting them to write either in their own blog or at least write posts and pages on the course blog, which was open to the public. Mm. And I noticed two things. First of all, it was incredibly easy to get students to do it. I'll be honest with you. I mean, I've had hundreds and hundreds of students create either posts or pages, and I have never had to do much more than give them, a simple write-up of here's 5 steps to get your first post up. And bam, they do it. Which compared to using the LMS, where we have entire staffs dedicated to here's how to use your LMS, and there's a training course to learn how to use the LMS to do your course. It seems crazy to me. I've been that crazy voice on campus that keeps going, why don't we improve the user experience? Nobody ever took a course to learn how to use Facebook. Nobody ever took a course to learn how to use Google. Why do we have to teach students a course to learn how to use the LMS? So anyway, so I pushed forward, and one thing that really clicked in my mind, there were several students, but I remember one student who was very reluctant. She was an immigrant from Cuba, and she was this is a comparative economic systems course, and she was very reluctant to post something or write up, and she sent me an email, and she says, I don't have anything to say. Nobody wants to hear what I have to say. And I said, well, just write what your own experience is. You've got some voice. And I mean, personally, I'm thinking, this is somebody from Cuba. We're talking about different economic systems. I think she's got something to say. So, and it worked. I just, made it available. And so she puts up her first post or two page. And, and one of the first posts, she just talked about the old cars in Cuba. And, the old 1950s Chevys and stuff like that they have to keep rolling because they haven't been able to get cars and parts because of the embargo for decades. And the response from the other students was fantastic. I mean, they were all very interested in this. And so then I saw the transformation in that student over that semester and go, oh, here's a student, no confidence, didn't think she had anything to contribute. And she's really growing and transforming into somebody. And that really, really got me. And I'm going, yeah, that's what it's all about.
Wow. That's incredibly powerful. And I love, so much of what you talked about. We could unpack a lot of those pieces individually. And one thing that really stands out, your reflection on economics, and it strikes me that this making the information so free and open, it's so much at the heart of the philosophy of WordPress itself.
Yes,
making it free and open for everyone. Like bring what's happening. You're saying with the blogging of economics is similar to what's happening with this software development. Bringing things. It's like a rejection of the proprietary, expensive mentality. But let's make it free and let's bring it out in the open. What was previously difficult to obtain or only accessible by the privileged few is now granted to the masses. It's now a fundamental right for all of us, and it's fantastic. And it's so fascinating that WordPress is a mechanism for delivering this in these industries.
It is. I just got back from a conference last week called Open Ed 16, the 13th annual one in Richmond, Virginia. This was actually an international conference. We had folks from the UK, Canada, Mexico, Australia, and some folks chiming in virtually from Egypt and some other places. And this Open Ed movement is very, like you say, it's very much, it parallels the open source software movement. This is where we're talking about we need to make all of our materials in education Creative Commons licensed so that people can reuse them, remix them, revise them, do all kinds of things with them. And it really does parallel the open source GPL and all the other licenses type movement. And it's a sharing economy. It's a sharing system, and it's one that says we're all richer because we can all build off of each other, rather than this kind of closed proprietary stuff.
Exactly. That's really powerful. So tell me a little bit more about what you call the movement. So
It's a movement.
yeah, I'll let you describe it.
Okay. Well, it's at the moment it's admittedly a bit fringe, but it's been growing over, I'd say, the last decade, and it started at a few universities. University of Mary Washington being a lead one, City University, New York, and some others. And the concept is, it oftentimes goes by the name of, well, on the one hand, it's open education, and how do we get open education resources, Creative Commons licensed stuff, free textbooks, and get them into people's hands. And that's partly driven by the fact that, the big proprietor textbook publishers are ungodly expensive. I mean, for example, at my class at Lansing Community College, we've switched over to a Creative Commons textbook. It's as big, it's as good. It's either free for the online version, or if you want a printed copy, you can order one printed and have it delivered for about $30. And that's in contrast to the going price for a mainstream textbook these days is $300. So we're trying to save students a lot of money and some debt. At the same time, bigger part of the movement is basically to shift away from the old idea of content transfer, that, I'm the professor and I am the source and font of all the great knowledge. And it is your job as student to simply absorb all of my wonderful knowledge. Because the truth is, I mean, a little sarcastic there, but but the truth is the world's different. You got Google at your fingertips. You have a world of information out there. Information's changing rapidly. What's really important is that I help you become a creator. And so it turns out that's actually when the real learning happens. If I just tell you stuff and then you regurgitate it for a test, you don't really absorb it deeply, and it's a good chance it's not going to stick around. But if I have you do things where you have to create, you write, you put together images, you put together videos, you share them, you become an author. If I shift from what's called we're used to the old style, which is disposable assignments. You write you write a research paper for me. It's relatively pointless because I'm the only one that's ever going to read it, and that's going to be it, and it's going to disappear. I'm trying to shift away from that to more authentic stuff where folks are actually creating and writing. I'll give you a couple of examples. There's a very good friend of mine at Plymouth State University in New Hampshire called Robin DeRosa. She's actual ham on the Twitter. Anyway, Robin is creating a Creative Commons, I should say Robin and her students are creating a Creative Commons licensed online textbook anthology of early American literature. And it's used in a American Lit and composition course. And each semester, students are writing, researching things, putting pieces up into the book, and adding to it. So they're building off of what students did the previous semester, and at the same time creating artifacts and creating material for the students that follow them.
Wow.
And we've got some folks doing that now, trying to do that. We're just getting started doing that at Lansing Community College, and it's a very, very powerful thing because when students find out that what they're going to do is going to be meaningful, someone's going to read this, someone could actually use this. They're writing for a real audience. It becomes a lot more rewarding, a lot more interesting. They get a lot more out of it. They learn a lot more. As an example, I have I have a colleague who last month teaches, well, she's been teaching science for years, biology, one of the intro biology courses. And for years, even though it's a biology course, she's been trying to get folks to take a bigger picture. And so she's had a couple of essay assignments about, research some scientist or biologist and, talk about their research. Well, she's done this for a few years. And in the past, it's always been the standard disposable research paper. A student writes it up, submits it, you grade it. Nobody ever reads it other than the professor. And so she changed, and I helped her set up. And this year, we got each one of her students their own WordPress blog. And she's got a Course Hub WordPress site. So this, through a couple of magic plugins, one of which is called Feed WordPress that does syndication, the students actually, instead of writing a paper, create a WordPress post, and then they post on their blog, and as long as they tag it with the right category, Feed WordPress syndication automatically goes out and grabs copy of that post from that student's blog and circulates the copy into the Course Hub. So now everybody in the course can go to the hub, see what everybody else is doing, sort it by student or author. And, you don't have to sit there and go look at 25 different URLs.
Right.
But at the same time, the student has their own site, their own voice. Yeah. And as a matter of fact, we've set it up. Students can customize it. They can change there's some limited options, but they can change the theme, decorate it, do whatever they want, customize it. And they can post other stuff there too. It's their site. It's their blog. We're just asking them, hey, when you do your biology paper, do it here and tag it, Anyway, so this professor, we got an excited text the day after the first assignment was due, and I love this text. It was, they've done it, and I've done the assignment for 3 years. The quality of these is thousands of times better.
Wow.
And students went deeper into the research. They got images. They grabbed other information off the web. That they did the stuff that really makes for deep learning. And that maybe in a nugget is part of a big part of what the movement's about. There are some of the bigger schools. Right now, there's about 40, maybe 45 places doing full-blown what are called domains of one's own programs. And the prototype for that, I think, is University of Mary Washington in Virginia. At Mary Washington, when students enter, it's a 4-year school. When students enter, they get their own cPanel shared hosting account.
What? Really?
Yeah. The school pays for their own cPanel shared hosting account. And they've got support. And it's really a nice setup. There's uses Installatron, and the Installatron's been customized. So in a few clicks, a few things, and they're shown how, hey, here, create your own WordPress site. Or they can also do Scalar or make a bunch of other packages if they want. And it becomes their account for the entire time they're at the university. Okay. Now, I'm not going quite that far. Because to get to folks up to a cPanel is a little daunting for a community college. Yeah. I'm working on blogs and websites. But so anyway, what happens then at the end, you graduate from Mary Washington, and the courses have all been coordinated. So faculty are saying, do this on your website, do this on your website. We'll circulate it into the course hubs. Then when the student graduates, they've got two things. They have a personal identity on the web. They are somebody on the web. And they've got the best portfolio one can imagine. And since it's WordPress, or it's cPanel, if it's not in WordPress, it's in cPanel, it's entirely portable. There's a lot of big software proprietary companies that are trying to sell colleges and universities what are called e-portfolio systems. And they're really bloody expensive for the colleges and universities, and they really don't do that much for the student because, at the end, the student doesn't really have anything that they can take with them. But, here, you could just package it up. It's a standard WordPress install, so, and put a plug in here for a host. There's a hosting company that spun off from University of Mary Washington called Reclaim Hosting, primarily works in the academic arena. Mm-hmm. And they've got outstanding service pricing for that kind of thing. And so, if student graduates, they want to take it with them, well, they can just spin off into a Reclaim hosting site, maybe $40 a year, have the domain and the hosting, or if they want, they can package it up, take it to GoDaddy or DreamHost or anybody else they want, and have their own stuff. So that's kind of the concept. And then there's a lot of spin-offs from this that are going on. Excuse me. Like I said, here at Lansing Community College, where I work, and the project's called the Open Learning Lab. I don't really have a title for it, I guess, so I like to call myself the chief instigator. We are primarily putting up WordPress sites, blogs for students and faculty. We're putting them up for, both for personal identity type stuff, but we're also experimenting with discussion sites. We're experimenting with collection sites where folks can share ideas and we can filter through them. And then we're coming up with some customized sites dedicated to particular tasks. One of the ones we've had more success with, instead of giving a student a whole blog, like, say it's Comp 1, a site that its only reason for existence is to provide a place to collect the one essay assignment in a course. Yeah. And students go there and they create a post. And that by itself, again, this transformation of going from disposable paper assignment to writing in public is a major, major change in the student. So we're working on that. Michigan State, I'm pleased to say, has also jumped on the bandwagon. I like to think they're following my lead, but Michigan State has launched a similar project. Their primary focus is with faculty and graduate students to try to get them a presence on the web and to present their research and their scholarly identity. You've got other places, like I say, Virginia Commonwealth's got 20,000 of these websites that they're managing. And what I just heard about last week is at the really cutting edge, a couple of schools, Georgetown, Oklahoma, Brigham Young, are experimenting with creating APIs for students.
What?
The good old fancy little dance about, requesting a transcript from the university or trying to get any of your other identity or stuff out of your files and stuff from the university. They're pioneering and putting together, it's in a kind of experimental beta phase at the moment, defining an API and then putting together, self-builded apps. So students can basically build their own personal portal that pulls that data in. So if you want your transcript, you just pull it in through your own app and give it to whoever you want. So the students truly are owning their own data, which I think is a fascinating concept. I mean, the data is about the student. Why shouldn't the student have some control over it? So
that's remarkable.
Yeah. So it's an interesting movement. I'm pleased to be part of it. I know I was at this, like I said, I was at this conference last week with a lot of these people. Very exciting time.
That's fascinating, and it's so much information. I almost don't know where to start. I guess let's speak broadly.
Sure.
Like what? Looking forward a few years. What What progress do you anticipate, and what would you really like to see? Like this movement being successful. What does that look like in 5 or 10 years? How different is the academic landscape if this movement that you've been talking about, which sounds amazing, is truly successful and takes off, and whatever your most optimistic predictions are?
Well, my most optimistic predictions, my hope, what we're really hoping for is I would see the college and university students would come out of their time in college and university with a web identity, feeling like they are not consumers of the web. They're not passive consumers, but rather they have a presence. They have their own personal identity. They are digitally literate. And by digitally literate, I would distinguish that from, actually, I would say I would go beyond digitally literate. I'd go to digitally fluent, to the point where they know, in addition to being able to have their own websites, and literally I would hope a lot of them would have their own domain name. So they can put their stuff out there, whatever it is. But I'd also hope that they would better understand the web and the ideally decentralized portion of it, so that they would also better understand that when they do engage in, don't get me wrong, I use Facebook and I use Twitter and I use a bunch of other sites too, but I'm aware of what I'm giving away. Like the old saying is, if you're not paying for it, you're the product.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, we'd hope that folks would understand that and be wiser consumers of it, as well as the ability to be their own producers. And I think that is exciting for education. I think it's exciting because I think it brings a higher level, a deeper level of learning when people do that, when they create. I think it has a lot of optimism for society as a whole, because I think folks will be, I think they'll be better global digital citizens and participants. And on the other hand, and I think it's also for the WordPress community, I think it's enormously optimistic type of thing. This would be thousands and thousands, like I say, hundreds of thousands of people each year becoming exposed to WordPress and what you can do with it, and opening up the range of things that can happen. So at the same time that WordPress itself is opening up the kinds of stuff that you can do with it. So I'm really excited about those aspects of it. Now, you asked for kind of the optimistic view. I got to be a little realistic. It's not a slam dunk. There are the forces of, I won't call them the forces of darkness. I will say there are the forces of, we've never done it this way, let's do it the old way. Let's maximize control.
That really was my next question, is I was going to ask you to unpack what the big barriers are for that optimistic prediction. What stands in the way, and how serious are these barriers?
There was actually a fair amount of discussion of that at the conference last week. It's a little hard to tell. Personally, I think the barriers are mostly internally within higher education. I think that's where the biggest barriers are, within higher education. The forces that either don't want to change because right now it takes a fair amount of work, to transition. Like if you're a faculty member and you're used to going in and doing, lecturing a lot and doing stuff the old way, it takes a fair amount of work to come up to speed on this stuff. But and likewise, for most administrators in colleges and universities, it's strange stuff. They don't necessarily understand it. We have it in Michigan. We have a real exception to that. The dean of College of Arts and Letters at Michigan State, Chris Long, really gets it and is a big blogger himself. But at a lot of schools, it's strange. They really aren't that tech advanced, knowledgeable individually, and they're constrained by time in trying to learn about it. Similarly, depending upon where you're at, if you're at a community college or say a 4-year school that's heavily dependent on adjuncts, part-time teachers oftentimes don't have very much time. So if they're not used to this technology, they may not have the supports to get up to speed on it. That's a barrier. That's one I'm trying to work on. But getting school support for it is a challenge. We also run into the forces of, the same kind of stuff that always happened in corporate IT arenas, which is, what 30 years ago, when I was getting started, they used to joke around, nobody ever got fired for recommending IBM. And 20 years ago, it used to be, 15, 20 years ago, it was nobody ever got fired for recommending Microsoft. Well, right now in colleges and universities, you don't get fired for recommending the big Silicon Valley ed tech solution like Blackboard.
Right.
Whereas this looks like it's risky. What about the control? So it's mostly the fear of the unknown, I think.
Sure.
Those are the big barriers.
They sound like, by their nature, temporary barriers to me.
I think so. I think it's inevitable. And I think it's also inevitable because, to be honest with you, the older style thought of what it means to go to a college course, this stuff from 20 and 30 years ago where, like I say, I am the controlled source of this scarce knowledge, and it is my job to, open up your skull and pour the knowledge in, and your job is just to absorb. To be honest with you, we're going to get beat. I hate the term disruption myself, but, you can get short videos. You can go to Crash Course. Take Crash Course on the web. You can find YouTubes for little things, for different stuff. We're going to get beat on that. So if we're going to survive, and in fact, AAC&U, American Association Colleges Universities, Association American Colleges Universities, just published a big white paper in September that in effect says, as colleges and universities, we have to look at creating a new digital ecosystem for learning that promotes the kind of deeper learning and enables two things. Enables students to connect with other learners and build a learning network, and also allows students and faculty to be creators, to rather than just be consumers of what some portal gives them. So I think it's inevitable, but it's going to take time. In the meantime, there's battles to be fought.
There certainly are. So that's pretty exciting stuff. I'm really fascinated by the whole thing. You've mentioned a couple of acquaintances, other schools, conferences in particular you've been participating in. So maybe give us a little bit of a sense of the landscape, like who else is really moving and leading this, and especially for those looking to engage a little bit more, where can they learn more about this movement, the schools that are doing it, the conferences to attend, and so on?
Well, like I said, there's Open Ed 16, and a lot of the action for that kind of community, the educators, actually happens across Twitter. But there is another organization that has formed in the past year and had a conference last summer, going to have another one this summer, and is going to have an online virtual conference in January that's open to anybody. It's an organization called WPCampus.org. And I'd urge anybody to go to the website, wpcampus.org. WP Campus pulls together actually two kinds of folks. It's all about people using WordPress in higher ed. And so it's pulling together the kinds of folks I'm talking about that are using it in teaching applications and learning applications. It also pulls together what is a very, very large community of the people who use WordPress to run the college and university websites. The the main site you go to when you go to university.edu, whatever your college or U is. And some of those sites, by the way, those are some pretty big, complex sites. And they face a lot of interesting challenges. I would suggest, especially if there are any listeners out there that are developers, theme developers, you're looking, other folks working in the WordPress area, take a look at it, that community. It's an entry point. You can find out more about what we're doing and doing kind of stuff.
How involved are you with WP Campus?
I'm not one. I can't say that I am one of the big co-founders. I was there at the founding, and I helped. But the huge weightlifting goes to Rachel Carden, who's used to be at Alabama, is now out in California, and several others. We've gotten some good support from Modern Tribe and a lot of folks running from a lot of organizations. And if you're interested in working in it, there's also a pretty lively Slack community with it as well, and that's a good place to join in the conversation. As far as building on the other part, the learning side of it and how it's using in teaching pedagogy applications, actually getting the community, the virtual community build is actually one of the challenges I think at the moment. It's been kind of a very loose movement. So it's kind of grown very organically. I connected with somebody and then maybe through Twitter, and then I see somebody else's, and then we've all followed and connected to each other, and we're following each other's blogs and so on. As far as how do folks enter into that, we need to work on that. That's something I have on my list. I've actually started a nonprofit called Maurer2.org, MAALARTU, but it's in rough form right now, and we're working on how to get that going. So,
I think it's
if I had 72 hours a day, I'd be in great shape.
Oh yeah, for all of us who feel the same way.
Right.
So, I think it's super, super cool that you, and not to jump back too far, but
Nope.
there was a time where you got some validation of this, and something that you sought out independently to do, and had questions about how it would be received. You were, an early adopter of this, and did it on your own, really. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it doesn't sound like there was much of anyone that you looked to inspiring you to say, I'm going to copy them because it looks like it's working. You tried it out of your own volition, which is pretty remarkable.
I had heard a nugget of the concept back in 2012 and 2011. And at the same time, if anyone's followed the higher ed space, they may know that back in 2011 was the dawn of what at the time was being called MOOCs, massive open online courses, and the creation of a couple of Silicon Valley companies, Coursera and Udacity. And I set out in my own course. You're right. I just set out on my own because I looked at what these companies like Coursera and Udacity were doing, and I thought, I guess I had the audacity to say, well, hey, I wonder if I could take my Principles of Econ course and basically create kind of a mini MOOC. For a while, I was calling it a local open online course, or a LOOC. mostly because I like the name Luke. But anyway, so I just said, well, I'll try this with WordPress, and students took to it, and actually the amazing thing for me, another conversion point, was when I first moved my online course content out to a public WordPress site away from the LMS. And in the first iteration, the content was essentially the same stuff I had inside the closed LMS. I mean, it was move first, rewrite later. And in the first semester, my success rate, meaning the percentage of students that got a C or higher by the end of the semester, jumped about 6 to 8 percentage points, and then didn't go back. Wow. And that was enough to convince me. So it's like, okay. And so then I started asking students, and they're going, well, yeah, well, it's easier to navigate. It's more fun to read. I would get stuff like, well, I can do this on my phone, which of course is natural, because you pick a responsive theme and as professor, oh, see how hard I had to work? So it was doing that. And then for me, it was connecting to other folks that were doing this and hearing about it and building it. Yeah, it's been kind of fun. But for a long time, and this gets back to some of the barrier in colleges and universities, I was afraid. I thought, hey, I'm off the reservation. I'm not, I figured I would do it first, beg forgiveness later. Didn't know how anybody, because I didn't know how to ask for permission. I didn't know, and I did it on my own nickel. Now, I was fortunate being a full-time professor. I'm in decent, and my son's grown up, graduated from college, so I could afford to pay for my own hosting and have been doing some shared hosting for a long, long time. So, I was able to do it. So, that's part of what I'm working on now, is figuring out how do we get the cost down? How do we make it available to everybody? And I think this is actually kind of the dynamic that happens at a lot of schools, is a couple of professors hear about it, they play around with it some, somebody demonstrates it, and then the opportunity arises to, you've got something to show somebody, and then you get an opportunity to do it.
That's amazing. Really inspiring and incredible that, the proof is in the pudding, that it's better for the students, as you've demonstrated in your experience, your long-term experience.
Yeah, it's and not just my experience. Like I say, the schools that have really done it in a big way, because they've been able to put a lot more resource toward it, just finding outstanding results.
That's great.
Outstanding.
That is really, really cool. So we're kind of winding down to the end of our hour here, Jim, and as I predicted, time just flew by.
Yeah. One thing I want to throw out, I just want to put a big shout out to everybody, all the developers, designers, everybody in the WordPress community. When you put stuff out there and you put GPL on it, you make the stuff free. I know how hard it is for a lot of you to, eat, and you got to make money. But let me tell you, when you can put that stuff out there for free, you put some of those plugins out there for free, we can get a hold of them. You make this stuff possible. And you may not always see it, but, I would be in a world of hurt if I couldn't get to that stuff in the repository.
Amen. That's a powerful message, and something that maybe a lot of us doing this full-time need to be reminded of now and then. So thank you for that message. And Jim, just a couple final wrap-up questions for you. Looking ahead to your calendar for the rest of 2016 and early 2017, don't know how far you plan things out, but where might somebody bump into you in person?
Well, you can oftentimes find me in Lansing, at Lansing Community College. Right now, I don't have much scheduled, which is actually a tad unusual. There's a good chance I've got some speaking proposals out, but haven't heard back. And unfortunately, there are conferences where I'm going to I have to be accepted as a speaker to justify the trip, because one of them would be League for Innovation in the Community College Innovations Conference in San Francisco in March. I will definitely be involved in the WP campus conferences, the virtual one in late January and the face-to-face one next summer. We don't have the location or time yet, but it'll be during the summer. That announcement should come in a few weeks. And I'm looking for stuff, and if folks are interested, if I can work the travel out, I'm more than willing to talk. I've talked to a lot of groups, so if people want to know a small group, or you're interested, particularly if you're from a college or university, let me know. We can work it out either virtual or in person.
That's amazing. Yeah, fantastic.
And if they need to get a hold of me, just I'm EconProf, EconProph on Twitter, and that's probably the easiest way. Or go to the blog. I think there's a contact form on the blog. Maybe not. If not, there is at jimluke.com. So.
All right. Just one more real quick. Do you have any
Sure.
good recommendations for guests that I should have on the show in the future?
Well, there's a guy from Virginia Commonwealth University by the name of Tom Woodward, who is a fascinating guy. He's actually used to be he's trained as a historian, but he's gotten into this WordPress thing, and he's one guy supporting a multi-site with 21,000 websites on it.
Oh my gosh.
And one of the slickest, coolest guys I know. And so he's got lots of ideas. I was just picking his brain Tuesday. He would be a good one. There's a couple others like that. I'm not sure.
Sure.
So
Yeah, that's good. Thanks for the recommendation.
Okay.
Yeah. And so just wrapping up, is there anything else that you would like to encourage people to take action on? Or you've already mentioned how people can get in touch with you. Any final pitches or words of wisdom as we close for the evening?
No, I guess that would be it. I guess. I think you've picked my brain clean now.
Well, so, yeah, that's thorough.
Okay.
I appreciated the discussion very much, Jim. It was inspiring and encouraging. I am uplifted by your optimism and the work that you're doing.
Thanks.
I think it's very, very important. I completely agree with you that this is important for not just the academic world or the WordPress community, but for our society in general. Things are changing, and you're a big part of a positive change. So thank you, Jim.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
It's been a pleasure. That's episode 121, folks. Thank you, Jim Luke, for joining us. See ya.